started. All right, let's go. 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to Life on the Line. Life on the Line is a podcast sponsored by Lifeline Community. We talk about issues of philosophy, theology, politics, life in general, and try to get to the subtext of what's shaking, what's going on, and think a little bit deeply about issues that we might just take for granted in some ways. My name's Bryan Hurlbut. I'm the lead pastor at Lifeline Community. And we're a church located in West Jordan, Utah, for whatever that's worth. Got a radio ministry in northern half of Utah you can check out. And we have podcasts and a bunch of other media. Services at 9 and 11. If you ever drift this way, you can taste us a little bit on YouTube with our sermons and other things like that. I'm joined each week by our pastor of worship and media. His name's Bradley P. Homer. Brad, tell me about it.
Hey. Oh, good morning, everyone, or evening, whatever is happening.
Or to quote, let's see, was it Jim Carrey in The Truman Show? Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.
Good night.
There you go.
Yeah, I'm doing well. Had a great day thus far. Ready to talk about this subject.
Fired up on this one.
But before we get going, we should mention, if you're listening on the podcast, you can catch this on YouTube at LifeOTL. At LifeOTL. That's our handle on YouTube.
So that Life on the Line.
Life on the Line.
Life OTL.
Mm-hmm.
That's creative.
So,
Wow.
Life on the Line was taken up by John Travolta.
Oh,
It was some movie about
we know you can dance better than he can. We know you can.
It wasn't about line dancing, Life on the Line dancing. It was like about oil rig drilling or something like that.
Oh, it's a movie.
Yeah, it's a movie, and they took all the web address.
Hollywood ruins it again. John Travolta.
Oh well,
friend of the show. John
yeah,
Travolta.
I hope so.
Hey, we're going to talk today.
He's staying alive.
He's staying alive. Very good.
Yeah.
I saw what you did there. We're going to talk today about an issue. You know what? As I think about it, preaching, I've never preached a sermon just on this issue. I have never listened to a sermon just on this issue, and I think, which is sort of interesting, given.
Is it because it would be so much risk?
Oh, I understand.
Keep on going.
Yeah, we'd have to make that wager. So the subject is gambling.
Okay.
Gambling, and I think it's an interesting subject, and I wanted to address it and have us talk about it and engage it. You were game kindly for that. I'm glad for that, because I think this is fast becoming a much larger issue in our culture, largely due to sports betting. That's just proliferating right now. It's going crazy right now.
Well, we just had the Iowa game, which was, I think, the largest wagered game in female sports in history.
Wow. I know it was the number one women's basketball game in history that's ever been watched. 12.3 million, I think, viewers. But that's, which is amazing, given that it's like it was an Elite Eight NCAA tournament game, you know. And it's mainly because of Caitlin Clark, and because also the coach for LSU is Kim Mulkey, who is wildly controversial if you follow sports, which is just fun. Anyway. But and I follow that stuff.
And I'm glad women's basketball
fun.
has really taken off, too.
Oh yeah, and I hear people now, they're like, there's this girl in Iowa, Caitlin Clark. I'm like, yeah, I know. Like the last 2 years, she's been like incredible. Like, yeah, you're a little late to the party. It's okay. Jump on now. I understand it's becoming mainstream, but anyway. When I talk about gambling, and there's some basic questions, like a super interesting question is just this one that usually is met by, well, that's a difficult question. And it goes like this: is gambling a sin? Okay, so
yes, I've heard that one.
Is gambling a sin? So we go, well, okay, I don't know. How do I think about that? Because gambling is a big net. Like, what does it mean to gamble? And with that said, like, what's the difference between gambling and investing? Are you gambling when you play the stock market? Are you not gambling? Are you gambling if you do mutual funds? Are you gambling if you're a day trader? And all of a sudden now it feels like, it's almost like that game where you hide something, you go, warmer. Like, okay, it's starting to get more uncomfortable. You gamble if you is it a sin? So here's just some questions. We'll start with a series of questions. Maybe is it a sin to play the lottery? Is it a sin to pull the lever at a slot machine?
Depends whether you win.
Is it a sin?
No.
Is it a sin to play fantasy football?
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I mean, you can go down and down and down.
Is it
on
a sin
some
to
of
play
these.
bingo?
Is it a sin to play bingo? Is it a sin to,
Mm-hmm.
here's one. Is it a sin to go for a vacation and stay at a Las Vegas casino and spend, maybe you set aside a couple $100 to entertain yourselves down in the casino? Is that a sin? So now immediately there are some people who will watch this who will go to some of those questions. They're going, yep.
Yep. No.
And then others are going, no. And others are going, well, wait a minute. I went to Vegas last weekend and stayed at the Luxor. You know what I mean? Like, or, I mean, I know people who, in Vegas, they worked in the, that's where they worked. They worked in the casino industry.
That's another whole issue.
It's a whole other issue about the
about
nature
your locale
and about the nature of work and about what does it mean to contribute to cultural goods with your job and some of those things. There's a lot that goes into all that stuff. So anyway, it's a far more probably layered discussion than certainly growing up in a little bit more. I find people not very nuanced with it. I guess, and what I'm hoping we can do is maybe talk about it, not so much with nuance, but think about it deeply, because oftentimes, growing up with maybe in a little bit more of a fundamentalist wing, not hard, but certainly around a more fundamentalist wing, and with that being around me in some ways with other churches in our area in particular, the question of was gambling a sin was like, yes, and you just closed it up and didn't talk anything more about it. And then there's sort of this liberty piece that pulls the other direction, and almost it's like, well, no, it's just a wisdom issue. And so what I'm wondering is if it's as simple as saying gambling's a sin, maybe, or is it as simple as saying it's just a wisdom issue, maybe, or is it more layered than that?
Well, would you think that this discussion has become so hard because our culture is now post-Christian?
Yeah. And it's muddied things, I mean, like off air before we came on this, you and I were chatting about some different things. And it's like when you start talking about football or basketball now, you used to be able to talk about football and you would talk about it. And the closest thing you would get to gambling talk about football might be the office pool.
Mm-hmm.
But now you have the NFL promoting, encouraging, and making tons of revenue themselves off of gambling. So I mean, like, I was listening yesterday. I was listening yesterday to the Dan Patrick show, and Charles Barkley was on, and they were talking. He's a big gambler, but he was talking about how wrong it would be for an athlete to bet while they're playing and all of this kind of a thing. So kind of like, Pete Rose got in trouble as a manager, right? Betting while he was a manager. That's what's kept him out of the Hall of Fame. So you have these kinds of questions that used to be just about whether the ethic of the person participating in the sport, right, is one thing, but now you actually have the sport proper, meaning the organization that is which is amazing that the NFL is like a non-profit, which is a joke. But that idea that you have an entity like that now is encouraging and even angling toward and supplementing and creating avenues for gambling and sports betting. And I mean, sports betting is just, here's a stat, just give you one on the sports betting thing. So this was from money.com a year ago, a little over a year ago. So this was on the 2023 Super Bowl. Okay. Fans will bet an estimated what on the 2023 Super Bowl? It was an all-time record and more than double the figure the group projected in the run-up to the 2022 Super Bowl.
I'm going to say it's got to be $1.1 billion.
You ready?
Yep.
16 billion. That's
wow,
amazing.
That
16 billion dollars. I mean, that's mind-boggling. to think about. You know what I mean? So when you arrive at that place, that exponential amount of money, I mean, sometimes people don't think about how much a billion actually is, you know? I mean, a billion. So it's just mind-boggling how much that is. $16 billion was bet. That was 2023. And I don't have the stat from 2024, but I know this. The gambling industry has only over the last 3 years been trending up. It's not going anywhere south at all, right? Take away sports gambling just for a moment. This is from the American Gaming Association. So it's their website where they actually track the money that is spent on gambling month to month.
Okay.
So this is the total amount that's spent on, and this is like on the gaming industry. So think lottery, not lottery. Think casinos.
Yeah.
And other
Track betting,
all these kind of gaming kind of things.
Remember the OTBs?
This is January.
By the way,
off track
OTB?
betting for sure.
You know.
Off track betting, you bet. Now it's everywhere.
Which is another issue. Like a little side note here, OTB, even though it was a malformed form of community, that people would go to this place, and they would meet each other, interact. They'd have food and drink, and they'd watch the horses.
And so now what it is
now it's just click online.
It is, but it's also, you know what's interesting? It has become also a bit, that concept has become a bit of a replacement for the sports bar. So a lot of these places now, you go to the sports book to watch the games, and you're betting, because when you bet now, you're betting mid-game. You're betting on how many rebounds in the second half X person will have. It's all these parlays and side bets. So everything is bettable. Everything. You know, and so the side bets are unbelievable that they'll have on this kind of stuff.
Will he wear his socks up or down?
It's that kind of stuff.
Oh,
you know?
his sock is down. I lost $1,000.
It's you can just bet in live time on all these things. So a lot of times people will get in groups. They'll go to the sports book where they used to go to the sports bar. They'll go to the sports book, and now they can watch the game live with friends, place bets, in-game bets, parlays, all that stuff.
But by the way, B-Dubs, Buffalo Wild Wings, if they had a great business plan, they would have gotten in on the action right here.
But it's always too cold in there. And
it is a little chilly.
Like my wife says, it's really just overpriced chicken nuggets. But anyway, this is January, January 2024, this year.
Okay.
Gaming industry. This is the
per month.
This is the revenue, gross revenue from per month on the gaming industry in just January. Just January. You want to take a guess or no? Just 1 month.
Well, just the Super Bowl was what, 13 million?
Or Super Bowl's in February.
Well, that alone was over $10 billion.
But this is just gaming.
I'm going to say
this is playing games. Here.
$20 billion.
It does include sports betting. This is 1 month, and it's $5.82 billion for 1 month. So now you extrapolate that out, right? And you can see where it's going for the annual.
$60 billion for a year.
When you start extrapolating out. I think I saw a stat that like a year ago it was 2022 or something. It was like $54 billion, something like that for the year.
Okay.
And that does include some sports betting.
Now I have a question for you.
No.
Who makes the money?
That's a great question, right? Well, I mean, you have the casinos making a truckload of that money. I saw a stat that showed that they paid something like $14 billion in taxes. I think it was last year, or was around that, something like that. And I think the total revenue was like 60 billion, 66 billion, something like that. So they're making a truckload of money. Now, where this gets into some other things we'll talk about is when you talk about the lottery. And about who's making on the lottery and how that thing shakes itself out.
You got to play to win.
And some people will defend the lottery in different ways. So, anyway, what if I say to you, Brad, is gambling a sin? What's your first reaction?
I would say that theologically, oftentimes it minimizes the sovereignty of God. And as a Calvinist, I think that would be against what I would desire to believe with my life. So I'm not saying I know a scripture where it says it's overtly wrong, but I know the principle of trusting God and being wise stewards of what God has granted you are ethics of the kingdom. So anything that would be almost directly opposed to that is probably not a wise decision.
So what would you say somebody says, well, wait a minute, Brad. Okay, let's talk about gambling and sovereignty for a minute. I'm going to play the devil's advocate. Okay?
I love it. You're so good at it.
I know, thanks. They're going to say, hey, Proverbs 16:33 says, the lot is cast in the lap, but its every decision is from the Lord. Mm-hmm. God's sovereign over the gambling. So what's the big deal? If I go and I pull for Lucky Lemons, or I go and I spin the wheel in roulette and I just put it all on black.
Well, I would say that you're importing a little bit too much into that verse, because it is talking about lot casting.
And we should say what lot casting was real quick. Let me just explain that real quick so somebody listening goes, well, what are you talking about? So in the ancient world, you see this throughout Scripture, they cast lots. Now, we don't know exactly what it was, but the best we can get to from seeing some other things in the ancient context is that it probably was something like, kind of like you draw straws today, but kind of like you'd have clay potsherds, and there might be certain markings on them, and whoever drew the one that had whatever particular marking would be the one who got the lot. They would be the one who now had to either do something, or maybe it might be a way of making a decision. If we pull this lot, then we're going to up and we're moving west, kind of a thing, or what have you. So anyway, that's an explanation when it says lots. So go ahead.
So I think we need to take that verse at its face value, because the second half of the verse gives an explanation of how we might want to interpret it. So the lot is cast into the lap, but every decision is from the Lord. So I think the lot was made for decision making rather than the wagering of funds for increased gain. Mm-hmm. So I think we're importing a little bit too much.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think it's a very good point. I think the other part too
I got
is,
one every year.
Well, but the other point you alluded to when you talked about it is, and we have to explore this more, but there's also a part where, I mean, first of all, from a life standpoint, everything I do in one way is a casting of lot. And what I mean is, another scripture, who knows what a day may bring forth? I don't know what's going to happen when I get in my car and drive home. There's a risk factor there. There's risks with everything. And if we knew what those risks were, we could put like almost a little percentage over every decision we make, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a risk when you take any medication. There's a risk. Could be minuscule, could be somewhat, probably not maximal, but it could be, hey, there's a hefty risk here. In fact, when you go online, what do you see? Major. If you Google two medications you're going to take together, it'll say there's a major interaction. That doesn't mean it's going to happen every time. Doesn't mean it is going to happen, but it means it's a higher percentage for it. Or there's a minor interaction. It means it's probably a lesser percent of it happening. So everything has risk. So the idea that things from our vantage point have risk is not the same as gambling. We should note that.
Risk and gamble are two different ideas.
They're not the same. No.
Okay.
And so sometimes I think we equate those. We go, I don't know. We'll just take a gamble. And we say that like we'll take a risk. Well, we're taking risks every day. Everything we do. Our existence right here. We live in a place that has long expected. We had a small earthquake a while ago, a couple years ago. Yeah. It's long expected a huge earthquake. Correct. Our very presence in this place is a risk.
See you later.
In that way. So the point is, everything has risk. That doesn't mean that we're gambling in that sense, because we're not so much saying, let's do this to see if it yields this, per se, right? So risk means there's inherent things that could go wrong or go right based upon an action. Gamble is, I'm sowing something hoping to get more in return.
Yeah.
There's a difference between those two.
Well, let me bring up something that John Piper said about the difference, I guess, between risk and gambling. And the one is this, that gambling has a high percentage that you will lose it all. It's an all or nothing proposition, usually. Where risk is usually, a gradated loss. So, or gain. So it's not like you're going to double your money when you invest something. Typically, a lot of times it might be a 20 or 30 or 50% gain, but everybody wins when they invest it.
Yes.
Or everyone loses. There's not winners and losers in the type of investment I'm talking about.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's an important part. You're also contributing wisely to a larger market economy. Now, some people will come back and go, yeah, but gambling contributes to a market economy, which is a fascinating conversation. And maybe we'll have some of that, because I think some of that is an oversimplification of what the lottery even is in some of those ways, and
it provides for our schools,
what the
right?
lottery actually does. Well,
and the food programs,
it allegedly does, but this is interesting. That's one of the selling points of the lottery. And studies have been done on this to see, is that the case? Is that where the money actually goes? So to follow the money trail with it. And it's true that some money goes there. What's super interesting is to see that, we can just share this now. In playing the lottery, that you have a disproportionate amount of lottery tickets that get purchased in lower economic areas. And yet, when the funds get distributed in a lot of states, some of that funding will go back to schools because of legislative processes. But what's interesting is it proportionally doesn't go back to those school districts in the same way that it often goes to wealthy districts. So you end up having, by the lottery, you actually have poor people paying rich people. Is what ends up happening in some ways. That's often what happens.
I think
you also
it should be randomized, a lottery for the lottery. So we couldn't give any. It's a randomized gift. If it
you also have,
that would be a better proposition than what is going on.
You also have the fact that you have a huge amount of the money with the lottery that is purchased in like convenience stores, right? So you have a bunch that's purchased in these stores. So I was reading this. Stores get a commission for selling lottery tickets and cashing in on winning tickets. They earn on average 6%, but also earn substantial bonuses when a customer wins big. In 2020, they took in $5 billion. Stores did. Now, a point is made. 6%. This is in an article that I was looking at. The article was written in July 11th, 2022, and it was kind of looking at some things, not solely in Michigan, but it used Michigan as a little bit of an example. But it also said this: convenience stores account for nearly 2/3 of lottery sales. Major multinational firms profit from owning thousands of U.S. convenience stores, including the Japanese firm 7&I Holdings, which has more than 10,000 7-Eleven and Speedway stores. So what happens is the lottery ends up, in many ways, helping the rich get richer. That's actually part of what the system does. So in that way, this idea that it's sort of sold as, well, no, the lottery's great. The lottery gives all of their proceeds back. No, it doesn't. Does a portion come? Yes, a portion comes. But also, an article points out as well that we have mythologies about lottery, like most of the lottery money comes from these big Powerball lotteries, where it's whatever, $15, $20 million. $1
billion.
Right? $1 billion?
Yeah, it just broke $1 billion. Okay. It was in the Northeast somewhere.
So it's that kind of thing where it's like, that's what everybody's doing. Everybody's doing that. It's not the case. Most of the lottery earnings actually come from the small scratch-offs that are going on in convenience stores. A majority come from that, not from the Powerball stuff. So we live like in this sort of like cultural mythology about lottery and don't understand both that it's significantly impacting poor people, it's also helping wealthy people, and the Lions portions, that's all this money's going back into, education and community programs and community building projects and all these kind of stuff. Does some of it? Sure, some of it does. But lots of it doesn't. Lots of it gets hung up in administration costs. Lots of it gets hung up in state officials and all kinds of things lining pockets. So you have that kind of a mythology of the lottery that's given this sort of frosting on gambling.
So have you ever been tempted to play the lottery?
Sure.
Tell me about it.
Oh, well, I'm trying to think if I've ever purchased a lottery ticket in my life. And I don't think I ever have. I don't think I ever have purchased a lottery ticket. I'll tell you this. The one thing that I've shared this with people before. I've certainly shared it with my wife. I've never gotten into sports betting.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why is I literally know my personality and how much I love sports, how much I love competition, and how I kind of like risk now and then.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, if I started, I could see a scenario where it would sweep me away.
But if you start today, you get a $50 free bet. That's how they lure you in.
That
right?
is how they lure you
with
in.
FanDuel
And literally, I have to go, nope, I can't.
Yeah.
I can't ever touch it.
Yeah.
I can't do it because of that.
Did you ever watch that show? I forgot what it was, the movie. I forgot what it was named, but it was about this couple that...
Jerry and Marge Go Large.
Yes.
Yes, I watched it all.
That was
I've
hilarious.
watched it twice, actually.
I've watched it twice as well.
Yeah. So he used
What are the
he
chances?
used math to
Yeah.
game the system.
So it wasn't a gamble anymore.
It ceased to be a gamble. Yeah.
Yeah.
It became.
And they changed that law eventually, but
Yes.
it was interesting how he flipped it on its head and made it a community endeavor
Yeah.
to benefit.
Yeah. And to be
The
clear,
community.
I'm not talking in this podcast about the theology of Jerry and Marge Go Large.
No,
that's a bit of a unique thing. So the Bible talks about investment, by the way. I mean, which is something to know. This is Ecclesiastes 11. Cast your bread upon the waters, verse 1, for you'll find it after many days. Give a portion to 7 or even to 8, for you know not what disaster may happen on earth. If clouds are full of rain, they empty themselves in the earth. If a tree falls to the south or the north, and the place where it falls there to lie. He who observes the wind will not sow, and he who regards the clouds will not reap. Now that talks about risk and investment, right? You give portion to 7 or 8. You don't know what disaster will happen. In other words, diversify. Recognize that life's filled with risks and these kinds of things. That's not a text about gambling, because investment, as you pointed out, is a different kind of thing. It's about stability and yield and benefit to market business and those kinds of things that help the waters rise, including your own, in that way. We're talking about something that has, on the whole, negative effects, right? In fact, this was a startling stat when I read it. I was surprised by it. But according to the National Association of Addiction Professionals, problem gambling, which is an interesting phrase anyway, because it's implying that there's non-problem gambling, and that may be a different discussion, but problem gambling actually has the highest suicide attempt rate of all addictions.
Really?
I found that fascinating when I thought
wonder
of
why.
drugs, alcohol, pornography, that the highest suicide rate is gambling. And my assumption is because you are playing around in a very, very real way with not just your future, but the tangible future of others. And if you lose all of that, you can't look anywhere else in that except for yourself in that moment, and you've destroyed others. So it was up to 20%, highest suicide rate attempt. That blew me away. I was surprised at that, looking at it. So let's think about it this way for a minute.
Well, let me ask you a question before you go forward.
You bet.
Do you know of a Bible verse that prohibits or promotes gambling? I don't know of one.
I know ones that prohibit it in terms of what the principles are under it. So, let me give you an example. like maybe something close to it is Proverbs 13:11. Wisdom, wealth gained hastily will dwindle, but whoever gathers little by little will increase it. That's kind of the difference between gambling and investing. And there's something about gambling that is a hasty gain. That's what I'm after. It's minimal effort. It doesn't. If I buy a lottery ticket for $5, it's minimal. It doesn't. It's less than the price of a fast food sandwich right now, and I just buy that thing. But man, I scratch that sucker and I could win $1,000. You know, and so I'm looking for my heart wants something gained hastily. So I do think there are verses that speak about it in ways that are subtextual, and that's I think what we have to talk about.
So they're descriptive.
They're
of the situation.
They're descriptive. They are, but they're prescriptive of what sits underneath. So, for example, the famous verse in 1 Timothy 6:10 is prescriptive of what sits underneath, where it says the love of money is the root of all kinds of evils. There's a statement there that's telling me, it's describing, but it is also letting me know that if I have the love of money, I'm engaging the root of all evils. If that's what's the love is sitting there, and that's why I'm doing this, right? I want to do it. So I think what happens often is people then have to try to be honest about their own motives. Why are they doing it? And I think that's the important thing with gambling is, why are you doing it? Why are you doing it? Are you doing it because you don't like your economic situation, want to change it? Are you doing it because it's largely effortless? In other words, if I give you a chance to work all day and make X, or you can buy a lottery ticket, which do you choose? And is it about effort and that kind of thing? Is it about the bang for the buck? Is it about the thrill? Is it that your life feels boring? So you want that as a kind of a way that you can have thrill. The problem with that is that it's exposing that another link, so to speak, to the love of money, which Hebrews 13:5 says, keep your life free from the love of money and be content with what you have. For he has said, I'll never leave you nor forsake you. So the gambler has to ask a question, why? It's very similar to any addiction, but like it's the same reason why like somebody with, I was talking earlier today with someone who had come to me a long time ago dealing with some addiction issues in their lives, some pornography, like sexual, like addiction kind of things, right? And as we were talking, they shared with me something that I had said to them years ago that stuck with them. And I don't even remember saying it. But my question to them was, they talked about how their desire, and they just felt this pull and this pull and this pull and this pull. And I asked them this question. I just said, well, what is wrong with you that Jesus isn't enough for you? What is that? Now, I don't say that simply. I have to ask myself that question in various areas of my life. But the point being, that question is the central question. What is it that is insufficient in Christ that would make me go, I want to risk something. I want to gamble here.
So
I want to get a larger yield.
So would you say that somebody has crossed a line into gambling if they recognize the love of their heart is misplaced all of a sudden? It doesn't matter whether it's what it is, but if it's for economic gain, if it's a game of chance, and they just can't pull themselves away from it.
Yeah.
Then it's not just addictive. They've kind of gambled their life.
Well, because that thing that you're after never satisfies you, right? So this is what Ecclesiastes 5:10 says. It literally says, he who loves money will not be satisfied with money, nor he who loves wealth with his income. This also is vanity. Like, so you're just chasing something because you're filling something. You're filling a receptacle that is never satisfied with that which you're filling it with. It wasn't made to hold that, and so you just keep filling it. And I think that's the siren song, right? Well, but if I have a little bit, and you keep going down, 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 and the old adage goes, right? Like Vegas always wins. I mean, they always win. They make tons of money. People don't beat Vegas in that way. Like you might say, well, but I know a guy who went down. Okay, you know a guy. You know a guy. But there's a reason why that guy isn't shutting down the Bellagio.
Yeah.
I mean, it's going to have it, right? And that has to do. This whole thing is centered and rooted in motive, which, 1 Timothy 6. I read 10 about the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, but verse 9 before it says, "But those who desire to be rich, what happens to them? They fall into temptation, into a snare, into many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction." Now that's pretty close to gambling. I mean, that is what happens.
Well, it seems to look like that, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Like when people think they're down on their luck.
Yes.
Well, that's what it looks like.
I'm going to down on my luck. So somebody might say, but I've got lots of money, Brian. I'm fine.
Mm-hmm.
I got fine. In fact, I have lots of money. Or I'm comfortable, and so I set aside some of my income. This is arguments and stuff that I'll hear, these kinds of things, right? I set aside some of my income. So let's say that I have, I don't know, let's just pick a figure. Let's say I have $200 a month that I set aside for recreation. Now, what's the difference? What's the difference if I set aside $200 a month for recreation, and for 5 months I take $1,000 and I gamble with that money, or I take $1,000 and I take a cruise? What's the difference?
Well, you tell me.
I think that these kinds of questions are so great. I love these questions, right? What's the difference? There's a world of difference. So one of the things first that I want to think about with that is you have to think about stewardship of resources. That's the first thing. And second thing you have to think about is recreation. And I think you have to think about how they converge. So I'm supposed to be a steward of my time, my talents, my treasures, and we can have other things, but those 3 T's sound great, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm supposed to be a steward of those things. And I'm supposed to be a steward in that way of treasure that I have. I have to steward my money. Now, that doesn't mean that I can't use any of it for recreation or that I shouldn't use it for recreation. But the word recreation is about recreation. It's about what recreates me. Now, you enjoy cruises.
I do.
What do you enjoy about them?
I like it because, well, until recently, you couldn't get a cell phone signal, and you actually were able to get away. I like it because you don't have to worry about the decisions of everyday life, of where you're going to go, where you're going to eat. Like, there's minor decisions, but it's it's a place where you can just you can eat a little extra that day or not. You could go and do something fun. You could read. There's so much you can do when you're not worried about the commonplace decisions. At the same time, you get to meet new people at times. You get to explore new places that you've never seen before, that obviously God made, cultures that you've never seen before that have developed over time. So I think there's a lot of value per dollar, because a lot of times when we used to go on vacation, it was almost like work to go on vacation.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I think it's a better value than trying to, figure everything out all the time like I'm doing in normal life. So that's why I like it.
Yeah. So as you talk about that, I know you like cruises, and I think that it's a neat thing.
Some people hate them.
Some people do, and I think I would, but that has more to do with me being on a boat and not being being in the ocean and up and down and all this other kinds of stuff. But the bigger picture is this. Whether you go on a cruise or whether I go sit in a beach.
What if Kenny Chesney was the artist?
I don't know. Temptation.
Right.
No.
Country cruise.
Then whether I go to a beach house and rent a beach house. Mm-hmm. The point being, what's happening there is a recreation, using recreation to recreate. And that's actually the intent of it, is there's an engagement where that's therapeutic to the soul. You're honoring common grace. You're entering into the world as it is to in that way receive some of the fruits of God's good world in that way that help you be restored, renewed, reinvigorated in different ways. Okay. So when somebody says, what's the difference? Well, first, the difference is that not all recreation is recreative. And it's wise in and of itself to recognize the nature of the human soul and to do things that are recreative. It's difficult for me. I'm confident when I say this, there are some people who will listen and will begin to make the case why going to a casino for them is recreative. My second point, I hope, will come up against that a little bit because it's difficult for me to see how that could be recreative. And the reason why it's difficult for me to see how that could be recreative is because when recreation bumps up against stewardship, I have real questions to ask. Like, if I'm not being a good steward, am I at that point actually contributing to my recreation? Or am I actually sowing things both to the culture and to my own life down the line that are going to reap negative effects upon me and upon others?
Well, I think people take a stance that occasional gambling is neutral. That's the way they view it. It's not a big deal. It's only $100, or $5 or $10. It's neutral. But what you're trying to say is actually neutral doesn't exist.
Yeah. So let me say it to you this way. So I did some stat work before this podcast, and our listeners may or may not be familiar with the concept of a living wage. We might be familiar with minimum wage, might be familiar with the poverty line, but we might not be familiar with the concept of a living wage. So in short, there's all kinds of different technical definitions of a living wage, but in short, a living wage is basically what does it cost an individual to have all of their necessities met and to probably have a small portion left for unexpected expenses. So you can live, and you can live in a way where everything is taken care of. So your medical bills, your rent or housing is taken care of. Your food is taken care of.
So there's a modest net gain.
And then the modest net gain is basically for unexpected incidentals that you'll need to cover in life. Okay? Your car breaks down, whatever, that kind of stuff. Okay? So when you take
My Hummer broke down.
Your Hummer broke down. When you take a living wage, the living wage, and again, there's different, you can get different definitions. So the definition is going to drive, if you go online and look at living wage for the U.S., you're going to have different concepts of it that are going to be both demographically and conceptually different. What I mean by that is demographically, they're going to be different because maybe they're giving you a living wage for an average household, not an individual. They're also going to be different conceptually because it might be that like I saw one that was a living wage that it was like 50% for your necessities, like 20% in savings and 30% for, for spending. Well, that's actually that's a pretty loose lifestyle. That's not really that's a very different way of looking at living wage. So I'm going to pare it back and let's just kind of think in terms of one person having all those necessities met and having a little bit extra. Okay. If we take that, the person in the United States needs to make for a living wage about $25 an hour. Okay. It's about $4,300 a month, somewhere in that neighborhood. So I went to, there's a website, fascinating website with all kinds of work that's been done called the Global Living Wage. And you can go there and you can look at the living wage in various countries, not all countries, but they've done statistical analysis in specific locales, assessed it all through a whole rubric and analysis with multiple papers and updates and all kinds of stuff. But if you look at that, and then I did the math on it and thought, okay, what percentage these countries, these locations, what percentage is their monthly living wage compared to the United States living wage? That's going to give me a little bit of a sense of when I have X here, if that X was transported and I could give that amount to this person, what would it mean in their context, right? So someone living in, let's just say almost all of Latin America, So
Okay.
Mexico, you go all the way down, Bolivia, Peru, you're going Brazil, even those Portuguese. I'll just include it. So South America and now there's variances in specific countries, obviously, but in general, the living wage there is about 15% of what the American living wage is. Okay, now we have missionaries in Uganda that we love and that we support. In Uganda, which was typical of an African country. In Uganda, the living wage is about 5%, a month. So while here, somewhere around $4,300, there it's a little under $250, right? India, with now, which I think has now passed, or if it hasn't passed now, within the next 5 years, it's going to pass China as the number one populated country in the world. India is almost exactly parallel to Uganda, 5%. And that was it. And when I looked at that was looking not even in a rural area, that was an urban area in India. So the point that I'm making is this. When somebody looks at a month and goes, what's $200? $200 is almost the living wage of somebody in Uganda. So my question then becomes something like this. Should it even cross your mind that this thing that I'm going to give to an industry that largely preys upon poor people, that advances, and while there's all kinds of signs up about Gamblers Anonymous, is literally like, it's literally like walking into a needle shop and saying, hey, we don't want you to become heroin addicts. But anyway, you got this industry, and now you're going to say, of all the places I can recreate and all the things I could do with my money, I'm going to take the average living wage for someone for a month in a majority world country, and I'm going to go to an entity that preys upon poor people, and I'm going to choose to do that over and above everything. I think that sometimes we have to step back and ask almost like these common sense spiritual questions.
Well, that makes me feel kind of bad about myself. That makes me feel like a horrible person.
But that's but we have to frame some of that and ask questions. It doesn't mean I got to feel guilty because I have that money. And it doesn't mean you got to go, and I know the rejoinder. Somebody go, well, but do you think about that when you go out with your wife and you spend $50 on a meal? Do you? Well, I live in a culture, and I have to live with it.
Actually, it costs about $60.
You're right. And I have to sow to that economy to keep that economy going. And I'm actually giving to goods and services that help those waiters be able to pay for those kinds of things, right? But when I am helping then the person who is at the leading and dealing out at the poker table, I'm actually helping them continue in a profession that's contributing to the deterioration of the economic structures of poor people.
Well, let's go back to cruising a little bit, because when you think about gambling, there are things that come alongside with gambling that actually are not recreative. So often, if you gamble, what else do you do?
Well, usually you drink and smoke
and you smoke. Like both of those are. We all know that alcohol actually is a poison.
There's often sexual dynamics.
There's sexual dynamics. There's addictive dynamics to it. Addiction isn't usually, and all those three of those things are addictive, right? So there's actually a whole environment of this funnel into addictive behavior that surrounds gambling.
So fascinating that you brought that up. This is an article from Money Magazine.
Okay.
So I'll just put this in and read a portion of this real quick. The impact of problem gambling stretches beyond the individual struggling to overcome it. Gambling addiction also has inherent social cost. Experts say driven by criminal justice and healthcare expenses paid by American taxpayers. The NCPG puts that cost, I'm assuming that's an association dealing with gambling, puts that cost at about $7 billion annually. So that the social impacts that are impacting American taxpayers as we're paying for people to get help with their gambling problems or the requisite criminal activity that's resulted in association with their gambling problems. But Doug Walker, an economics professor at the College of Charleston who studied the social and economic impact of gambling, says that's an undershot. Researchers may be able to measure the crime rates and treatment costs associated with problem gambling, but how it impacts people's careers, family finances, and general well-being is harder to quantify.
Well,
to
it's
your point,
more.
Sure.
It's more. Yeah.
Right. And that's to your point. There's all kinds of associated problems that come. And whether you want to call them, I don't know if it's unintended consequences. There's certainly unplayed out consequences, unthought through consequences adequately. And now, the toothpaste is out, man, out of the tube. And that's the challenge. And why one of the reasons I wanted to address it is that it's so pervasive right now that you have, literally like the amount of money in sports gambling that we mentioned we started with, the proliferation of it. And you can have sort of, in one sense, what might look like benign, like fantasy football kind of things that you're doing with your buddies or those kinds of things. But you can have those, they can stretch to a place pretty quick where all of a sudden there's a couple things happening. One is you can stretch yourself economically in ways that are not actually wise for you to do. The second is you could be, and this is a bit of a slippery slope argument, and I don't want to commit a fallacy, but I do think you have to be careful that you don't open yourself to something that ends up leading to a place that lacks wisdom. So some of that has to do with stewardship. One of the things we're talking about, again, off the air is, some of this might have to do even with amounts in some ways. We talked about the difference of I spend $10 to go to the YMCA to get in and play a game of basketball. And I'm there with my buddies, or I'm even in a competition.
They should pay you, but
right? I know.
But
you go to do that, or I go spend $10 and I go to there's 20 guys, my buddies. We all got together and we're gonna play poker. And the winner gets the pot. So I got a chance to win $200 here, and I have a basketball game over here. And one of the things that we have to do is say, well, somebody goes, well, you're just paying $10. Either way. That's true. What has to happen is the person has to be honest with their motives at that point. Now, there's a realm in which that person over here spends $10 and they go, they have a good time, and their motive is just to hang out with their buddies. And oh, by the way, they could care less, but if they win the 200, they win the 200. That's theoretically possible, and it may happen in many ways, right? You could do a benefit poker tournament. I don't think there's something sinful about a benefit tournament. You're just giving and you're hanging out and playing around, and then the winners get whatever, you know what I mean?
And there might be prizes, but they're not doing it
not doing it for that.
prize.
They're doing it for, you're buying in your seat at the table, and the benefit of that is going to care for children and things like this or whatever. I mean, so
actually, our prize at Lifeline is a
things.
toilet seat that goes over your head at our poker tournament.
Yeah, so I think there's things like that where you
It's a
go,
real prize.
okay, there's a social actual aspect. Like, I'll give you an example. Every year with the NCAA tournament, I have a thing with two other friends, and we fill out an NCAA bracket, and the winner gets a steak dinner purchased by the two others as the three of us go out together. So it's literally two guys who are buying their other friend who won a steak dinner.
Who won this year? Or is?
This year it's not me. The previous year it was me, and they have not paid up on the steak dinner, so I still am owed one. But this year it won't be me. So the point being this: as we do that, what is that? Is that sinful gambling? No, that's friends caring for each other and having a good time. We're entering into something where we're not lacking wisdom, number one, and number two, the whole point is for us as buddies to hang out. That's the point. And then it's a way for us to rib each other, have a little fun, joke around, keep track of it all, talk a little trash, some of those kinds of things. And that's a fun way of engagement. But society isn't getting detracted. We're not lacking somehow fiscal wisdom in that dynamic. I'd get together with buddies and go out to dinner anyway.
And you might even buy it.
And I might even buy it.
Huh?
Well, I'm probably too cheap. But
I don't know about that.
Maybe I'd hope they'd buy for me.
But I think there's a question that comes to even small amounts of gambling where you need to ask the question, what does this mean?
Right.
And it's not it has a positive or negative meaning. So to get to your meaning, you have to assess your motive.
Mm-hmm.
So if you assess your motive is, I'm doing it for the big gain. I'm doing it for, pride. I'm doing it for, when you assess that motive, it's not a good meaning. But I think people don't enter into it that thoughtfully or that way.
I agree.
And as a result, they're dismissive of what we're saying. They're just saying, you're just being too stuck up about it. You're just being too...
I think the one other part you have to assess beyond motive, though, for meaning, the consequences actually do import into meaning. So, in other words,
Mm-hmm.
A man may come into my home unjustly, and I may have a motive of protecting my wife, and I pull the trigger and kill him with a weapon. But what does that mean? It means that his mother just lost a son. Now, that doesn't mean that my motive is wrong to protect my wife. But part of that meaning is his mother has pain now. His sister has pain now. So in other words, the consequence also has meaning. And I think that's important when it comes to this idea of gambling. I think that's why what am I sowing to when I play the lottery? There's consequences there, and they play into the meaning.
Yeah, and I think to the previous point, if we're not careful about those consequences, it kind of sucks you in.
Yes.
And they grow very fast.
You get narrow-minded.
Let me resurface the stewardship issue.
Okay.
So you mentioned the phrase, your money or my money.
Yeah.
Share how that plays into maybe a poor theology of stewardship.
So you immediately, one of the things we have to ask is, if I'm going to buy a lottery ticket, is this what God would want to do with his money? So I have to ask that question, which is a different way. And that question now becomes very different. Would God want me to take my wife out for dinner? Yeah. Now, would he want me to do it if I can't pay my bills? Probably not. But would he want me to do it if I have some excess income and I need some time with my wife, and we could have some God-honoring conversation and engagement and build in our marriage? Sure. I can see through to that. It's difficult for me to say, yes, given all the opportunities I have for recreation, this is where recreation and stewardship come together, that God would say, what I want you to do with my resources, so you as a finite creature, weighed down by anxiety, depression, sadness, brokenness, and the weight of your own sin and other sin, is to go to a place that preys upon poor people. That's what I want you to do. I want you to go there, and that's what I want you to invest your money.
Put that on a T-shirt. Put that phrase on it.
Too long. But that's, you know what I mean? So the moment I start asking that, oh, wait a minute. And that's the question we should ask, right? We should ask that in everything. How much of God's money should I keep, right? Rather than how much of my money should I give? And so, here's a verse, Brad, that makes me think along these lines. Someone should ask themselves this question. Proverbs 16:3 says, commit your work to the Lord and your plans will be established. So can you honestly, with a straight face, commit your gambling to the Lord? And so if somebody goes, yeah, I can. I'm struggling to get there.
I thought I heard that from Crespo Dollar once.
Creflo.
Creflo Dollar.
Creflo, give me $1. His middle name is Give Me.
I want you to commit your gambling to the Lord.
That's his middle name. Creflo, give me $1. Along these lines, I want to give you, I'm just going to read 3 verses real quick. And this plays into what you've just asked, okay? So Romans 14:23, context is about eating and eating, food sacrificed to idols and all this kind of stuff. It says, but whoever has doubts is condemned if he eats, because the eating is not from faith. And then this phrase, for whatever does not proceed from faith is sin. So it's a fair question to ask first. Can I go in faith to the casino? Can I go in faith to the bookie? Can I go in faith to the and buy the lottery ticket? James 4:17. So whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it's sin. So it's not just sins of commission, but it's sometimes sins of omission. That goes to how I should use my money to begin with. And then Ephesians 5:15 through 17. Look carefully then how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise, making the best use of the time because the days are evil. Therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is. I remember reading Piper on this, and one of the things that really struck me was how he articulated, and I thought it was just well said, something to the effect of basically you have a finite amount of resources. You have a finite amount of time in this life. Is that how you want to honor the Lord? And I hear somebody who's so resistant to legalism when they hear that, and they go, well, you can say that about anything. No, you can't. You can't say that about anything. You can't say that about going away for a week to the beach with your wife. You can't, because that really is in common grace and in the joy of the grace of marriage, something you can really build into. It's a wonderful thing. Now, you can go and waste your time. You can go and be sinful in it. You can go and ignore your wife, and it's a waste. But you can go and you can sow to eternal things in it. So it's not as simple as just saying you can say that about anything. That's lazy. That's lazy. But you do have to ask, can I say that this is a good stewardship of my time, my talents, and my treasures when I give to this kind of thing?
Now I have a question.
Yep.
Say it costs $1,000 to go to the beach with your wife. You only have $500. Do you go double or nothing?
It's probably a good place for us to wrap this up. Wow. Unbelievable.
But that's a real life way people think.
Yeah.
Like, and they think they're going to, like when they talk about the lottery, play the lottery and I'll give so much money away.
Oh, yeah.
Like they're fantasizing about something that's actually not real.
It's the person who says, I see all these rich people. It's the person who says, I see all these rich people, and if I had all that money, here's what I'd do. Let me tell you something. God hasn't granted you that stewardship right now, and the chances are that you would be far worse a steward with it if you had it than you think you might be.
Well,
and now somebody goes, that's just, no, it probably is the case.
If you look at the stats on lottery winners, on how many people keep and invest, and it just destructs.
Falls apart.
And that goes back to that verse you mentioned.
And I want to be clear. It's not to say that only poor people play the lottery. Lots of rich people play the lottery. That just because you're rich doesn't mean you've got money to spare and play the lottery. That's the reason why I brought up those stats about the global living wage index. It's not to guilt people. It is just to say you have to recognize that money is a finite tool. You are a steward of God's money as a finite creature with a finite tool for the possibilities of eternal impact. So what will you do with that is something everybody has to ask.
Well, I think a person who has more resources often skews what the risk is and what so that they might think I'm accountable for every $100 or every $1,000, where a person who has less resources is thinking I'm accountable for every penny. So now I'm not generalizing everyone with that. Sure. I'm just saying sometimes we have we're a little bit too loose, and that's me 100. Too.
100. It's a great reminder. Yeah. Stewardship should hang over us all the time. Yeah. And I don't want to, and a point I want to leave people with is stewardship is not inimical to recreation. It's not saying like, well, therefore stewardship means you have no fun in your life. No, you have to steward your rest. You have to steward all your resources. You have to steward caring for others. You have to steward caring for yourself. So it does matter, and you should sow to some of those things. However, that neither does that mean that you happen to it blindly and that you don't think about the weight of how you are stewarding. So in short, is gambling a sin? Most of the time. Let's put it that way. Most of the time. And is gambling, why is that the case? Well, because it's difficult to square stewardship, wisdom, proper motive, and cultural effects and results with gambling. it's difficult to bring those four pieces into concert with gambling in such a way that it makes sense for the advancement of the kingdom of God, or even for the just the common grace growth of culture.
I have a last question for you. If somebody listening to this podcast is struggling with an addiction to gambling, how would you advise them?
I tell them to seek a counselor first. We have a counseling center here, so if they were local, I tell them, come to Lifeline Christian Counseling Center, and you can get help. There are lots of opportunities, gambling addiction hotlines and things like that they can call, and they should consider doing that. But here's the thing. That's great, and they should do that because you need to get some help for some tools to help the immediate problem. But the deeper issue is that there's a discontentment in your soul that only Christ can fill. And so ultimately you hearken back to the gospel and you find, what is it that makes me desire to be rich? What is it that is this craving that I've wandered away from the faith with? I've wandered away because I'm filling myself with something that's not Christ. So what I would say is, walls are good to protect you so that you can do good soul work. So you might have to call the 800 hotline. You might need to come and get some counseling. But those things are the steps to take you deeper in to see, what is it in you right now that needs to be contented in Christ, that is trying to fill that contented hole with something that'll never fill it. We'll leave it there. And may you have a blessed and awesome, awesome rest of whenever you're watching this.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. And also, how do we get in contact with us?
Email me at Bryan, B-R-Y-A-N, at lifelinecommunity.com. That's the right spelling. Bryan, B-R-Y-A-N, at lifelinecommunity.com, or Brad, B-R-A-D, at lifelinecommunity.com. Brad, B-R-A-D, at lifelinecommunity.com. So, Bryan or Brad, we'd love to, you got questions, maybe there's something that's sitting with you, maybe you react to this. You also comment on the YouTube. If you pull this up on YouTube, there'll be comments down there, in the chat down there. You can comment and interact.
Only
a little
positive
bit, stuff like that,
or a good question. We don't mind good questions.
Yeah.
But
good question. But leave us a thought, and if you got a question, we'd love to take a little bit of a deeper dive on something else. That'd be awesome, or maybe an ancillary subject to this that you may be wondering about. So, anyway, God bless.